Hello, and welcome to Exercise 70, Dimensioning the Model, in your Rhino Training Manual Level 1. For this exercise, we will be using the auxiliary model called dimension. To start this exercise, we will create a new dimension style. To do so, let's go ahead and go to Tools, Options. Under your Rhino Options dialog box, go ahead and click Annotation Styles. And we're going to be creating a new annotation style. So over here to the right, go ahead and click New. In this case, we will be using one of their built-in templates, which is built-in template millimeter small. So select this template and then click OK. Now make sure that the template is actually selected. And before we proceed and use this template for annotation styles, we need to edit the template just a little bit. So from here, move on over to the right and click Edit. And the only thing we're going to do here is change our model space scale from 10 to 1. And then go ahead and click OK. We're going to begin by creating linear dimensions. Linear dimension creates a horizontal or a vertical dimension. So to make a linear dimension, go ahead and go to your dimension menu and select linear dimension. We're going to begin by working in our top viewport, right? So for the first dimension point, snap to the lower left end of the part in your top viewport. For the second dimension point, snap to the lower right end of the part in your top viewport. And it might help to turn on elevator mode using tab to make sure that your angles in your kind of guides here are going as you intend them to. And lastly, go ahead and click a point below the part to place the dimension text, like so. Now we're going to add some linear dimensions in our front viewport. So once again, from the dimension menu, select linear dimension. And for the first dimension point, snap to the lower left end of your part in your front viewport. For the second dimension point, snap to the upper left end of the part. And then for your dimension line location, pick a point to the left of the part, like so. Let's go ahead and create two additional linear dimensions on the top and right side of the part in the front viewport. So I'm going to bring up that command once more simply by right-clicking. And I'll go ahead and set a linear dimension for the top of the part, like so, and for the right of the part, like so. Next, we're going to add in some leaders. So to draw an arrow, leader, and text, we're going to go to our dimension menu and select leader. Then we're going to click on the top of the part in our front viewport, like so. For the next curve point, click a point to the right and at an angle from the first point, right? And we do want an angle, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off ortho to be able to get that angle that I'm looking for, right? And using grid snap, I'm going to go ahead and snap to the grid to place my next point. And finally, for my next curve point, right, I have ortho off still, and I do want that to be an orthogonal line, so I'll go ahead and turn ortho back on and click, right? To kind of finalize this part of the command and move into the actual text of the leader, I'm going to need to either hit enter on the keyboard or right click with my mouse, right? Then you'll get your leader dialog box, and here you can type in smooth finish and then click OK. There we go. And if you've noticed in your training manual, you'll see one additional leader that tells us the radius of this arc right here. So we'll go ahead and duplicate that leader here as well. Dimension, leader. First curved point is the actual kind of arc. Again, I need to turn off ortho to be able to get an angle in there, right? And then click to place the point. And then for my next curve point, I need ortho back on. Then I can click to finalize this part of the command and move on to the next part, which is the text. I need to either hit enter on the keyboard or right click. And then from here, I can go ahead and type in R5 and then click OK. Next, we're going to practice with radial and diameter dimensions. So once again, working in our top viewport, I'm going to go to the dimension menu and select radial dimension. For the curve for radius dimension, I'm going to select the lower right quadrant of the arc in the top viewport, like so. Now using Smart Track, I'm going to make sure that this radial dimension aligns with my linear dimension, like so. Next, we're going to practice with the diameter dimension. So go ahead and go to your dimension menu and this time select diameter dimension. For the curve for diameter dimension, select the upper right quadrant of the hole in your top viewport, like so. And once again, I'm going to place the dimension text using Smart Track to make sure it aligns to my previously created radial dimension. And I know for a fact that this dimension is in fact 20 millimeters, right? So I'm going to make sure I catch it at that particular dimension. Also, at this point, keep in mind that you are working with a three-dimensional object, so do keep that in mind as you're creating these dimensions and these leaders in your models. And also keep in mind that these dimension markers can be moved, much like any other object within Rhino, right? So, for example, I'm not too happy about how this object is overlapping my actual dimension there. So from my other viewports, I do have the option to move it into a better place, right? So I'll go ahead and type in the command move and move it, right? So you do have the option to move your dimensions and your leaders around once you have placed them, right? In case there is a little bit of an overlap going on, or if you have some kind of floating objects like you see here, right? Something that can also be relatively easily moved by just going to a different viewport, right? Like so. Okay, and lastly, we're going to cover continuous linear dimensions. The dim command, in other words, the dimension command, has a continue option that when activated adds chained dimensions along the same dimension line. This option needs to be activated for each dimension command that you begin. So to make a continuous, in other words, a chained dimension, let's go ahead and start by going to our dimension menu and selecting linear dimension. Now here, this is an important step. Make sure that in your command line, where it says continue equals no, make sure that it reads continue equals yes. So if necessary, click directly on it to toggle it to yes. Now let's go ahead and begin in our top viewport. For the first dimension point, snap to the left end of the part. All right. For the second dimension point, snap to the end of the vertical part, like so. Now pick a point above the part in your top viewport to place the dimension text. Next, continue to snap to the center of the hole and then to the right end of the object. And so again, I'm using my smart tracks to help me out here. And there I have essentially finished the continuous line dimension, right? Now we're going to add another continuous line dimension to the left side of the part. So once again, let's go to Dimension, Linear Dimension. And for the first dimension point, let's click the bottom left-hand side of the object. For the second dimension point, click on the top part of the vertical object. For the dimension line location, just pick a point to the left of the part. And once again, click on the bottom left-hand point of the vertical object on the top of the part. And lastly, on the top end point of the top left-hand side of the part. And then right-click or enter to finalize the continuous line dimension placement. Now let's finish up by dimensioning the rest of the drawing using some angle dimensions and some more continuous line dimensions in our right viewport. So I'll go ahead and begin by creating a continuous line dimension on the top of the object part. So I'm going to go to Dimension, Linear Dimension, again making sure continue is set to yes. And I'll go ahead and begin. That dimension line for the top of the part. Now I can move on to the right part of the object. Oops, undo. Like so. And lastly, I can add angle dimensions. I would very much like to add some angle dimensions here and here. So once again, let's go to our dimension menu. And this time we're going to select angle dimension. Select arc or first line. Go ahead and select the top part here, this vertical line. For the second line, select the horizontal line of the part here. And then lastly, move your cursor to place the dimension. Now we're going to place an angle dimension over here. Now this is again a three-dimensional object, and you might have some difficulty catching orthogonal lines due to the curvature here in the object itself. So I would suggest that you use your multiple viewports to help you for this particular part of the exercise. So once again, let's go to Dimension, and let's go ahead and select Angle Dimension. For arc or first line, right, notice I'm in ghosted style here. I'm going to select that back line down there. And then for my second line, I'm going to move to my right viewport and click on the left edge. And that will grab that surface edge that I need to establish this angle dimension. And then lastly, I can just click to place. right? And again, remember, this is a three-dimensional object, so it might look a little bit different in your perspective viewport than, you know, the kind of straightforward two-dimensional views that you're seeing in your other viewports, right? And also keep in mind that you have a layer in your layers panel, and everything we've done thus far was created in that layer, right? So you can turn it on and off as necessary. And that concludes exercise 70, dimensioning the model.